This is the eLearn Podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn Podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eLearn Podcast. I'm Laddick, and I have my guest today here, Mr. Vince Hahn. How are you, Vince?
I'm doing great. How are you, Laddick?
I am wonderful. Thank you very much. For everybody who doesn't know, where do we find you sitting today?
I am in my home office in Provo, Utah, looking at snow. And I'm actually looking at little robins jumping around trees, wondering what to do with all this snow.
I ask myself, what do these birds do? I'm sure that there's an explained on Netflix that will tell me exactly, what they do. But like I see birds flying around, not here, but in Colorado sometimes when I go there, and I'm just like, it's the winter time. There's no food. What do you do? Anyway, Great Pros, Utah. Very cool. Nice. And literally cool as well. Vince, you are the CEO of Mobile Coach, which I'm excited to have this conversation about chatbots and learning, but why don't you give us the background, on yourself, 60 seconds of who is Vince and what are we going to be listening to today?
Yeah, thank you for having me first. So the 60 seconds on me, I was a musician in college many years ago. I was a trombone performance major back in the early 90s. And no one really stopped to tell me that there's not a lot of jobs for trombonists.
I was a trumpet player. Many people told me.
Yeah.
Many people.
Maybe people tried to tell me and I just refused to listen. But when I graduated, I transitioned into tech. Back then it was the .com boom and there was a lot going on. And I found that working in technology was just as creative as being a musician. And so I've had a long career in building technology companies, softwares. I love being an entrepreneur. I did do a MBA at MIT just so people could take me a little bit more seriously. Like, are we going to back this trombone player or, what's this guy doing? So
100%.
Had some good experiences there. And I've been really passionate around working on technology around usability. How do people make decisions on how to use software? Has been a big passion of mine.
Fantastic. And so how did that translate into you now becoming the CEO of Mobile Coach? Like what was the, at what
Yeah.
point did you decide to jump and say, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm focusing, this is what I'm doing?
Yeah. So before I started Mobile Coach, I was recruited to come to Utah. I was living in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And there was a company here in Utah that was starting a behavior change company. They had some wonderful science around behavior change, and they wanted to use that science and build some technology around it to help people lose weight, walk more, sleep better, anything that was behavioral driven. And that was really interesting to me. At that time, personally, I was obese and I was going through my own very difficult habit changing lifestyle type of transformation myself. And so I was really interested in this science because I was using it on myself. And I found that it was really, the science can be great, but unless you can get people to human beings are really good at tricking themselves into making all sorts of decisions, good and bad. And I found that even though the science was really great, our habits and to break into the human psychology is so hard. What's that statistic that something like 70% of people who have open heart surgery because of clogged arteries just a couple years after their surgery are back to their old habits? It's like,
sure,
on one hand, mind-blowing, but on the other hand, yeah, I can see that. I could see that happening to me, actually.
Sure.
And so that is a long way to say that was a really fascinating project I was part of. And then it fueled the fire for me even more to say, well, how do we break in to getting people to pay attention to healthy messages? And that's how I started Mobile Coach, because the thesis was, what's something that people never ignore by and large? And to me, the answer was, if I get a text message from a family member or a close friend, no matter what's going on, they know I'm going to pay attention to that.
Right.
And so the thesis was, well, could I develop a chatbot that had a personality such where I could trust it enough, where if I get a message from a friend or I get a message from this chatbot, I would give it equal or almost equal attention. And that's how my Mobile Coach started, through that experiment.
I can't wait to hear if that was successful. I mean, we know notifications on our phones, right? I mean, even though all of the dopamine, science right now is saying turn off all the notifications because you're getting nothing done, we know that that's still there. That's exactly what it is, right? But let's address what I think might be the elephant in the room it is for me, but I think for many people who will listen to this is, we're recording this on the heels of the release of ChatGPT, which is now everyone's, going and talking to this thing. First of all, is this a chatbot? And second of all, what does it mean for what Mobile Coach does and those kinds of things? Let's just throw that on the table and talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I think the definition of a chatbot's pretty broad. I mean, I think the technical definition is a computer simulated conversation. So yes, even if you ask ChatGPT one question, it gives a response. To me, you can chalk that up as a short conversation, but it's a conversation. So I would say absolutely ChatGPT is a chatbot. What does it mean for Mobile Coach? Well, I think I think the implications of ChatGPT will be significant across technology at large. I think just the ability to step up the quality of an answer when you ask a computer a question is we had Google that really wasn't AI, but it was an algorithmic process to give me search results in a matter of links. ChatGPT is also algorithmic, but it's just giving me more of a substantial answer. How that affects Mobile Coach, I think, is still to be determined. I think that what ChatGPT can do is give you an answer, but it's not something actionable,
right?
Yet,
right.
And so there needs to be within the whole tech stack of AI. There's search, and then there's content, and there's context, but then there's actions. And so I think that eventually there's going to be a whole tech stack of information, context, but then doing stuff. And that's going to go into robotics too, like physical robotics. What's going to power a robot's decision to physically do things? ChatGPT might play a role in that. Other technologies might play a role in that. And similarly, if I ask ChatGPT, hey, you know what? I'm trying to lose weight. Can you send me reminders through my text phone, but not this phone? I have other phones. Send it to this phone at these times of days over the week, over the next 3 months. It won't be able to do that. And so there'll need to be some infrastructure of companies and services that can really do anything that a human being might request a technology to do.
So take me to then learning, right? Because that's what we want to talk about is using chatbots effectively for learning. And that can be upskilling, reskilling, other than I'm assuming that's where you focus in Mobile Coach, like places where we have a really tangible A to Z learning outcome that we want to get to. How are chatbots there? Like, make the case for you really should be thinking about this as an effective learning tool in your in your company, in your university, in your course, whatever it is.
Yeah. So, I think one of the greatest functions of learning anything is time. So, the more sophisticated the skill I'm trying to master, or the more complex the knowledge set that I'm trying to gain. I wish, those of you who've seen The Matrix, they just plug something to their brain and all of a sudden they could do all this stuff, right? That's not reality.
Can we pause? Can we pause for just a second? Just in The Matrix, it's old enough that whatever the real guy, he had to like put a disc in the system to like zap it into. I just love how like that was like it's that old. Oh my lord. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So and so if in as much as you all agree that a big part of learning is driven by a function of time, whether that's 1 hour or a 3-hour workshop or 6 months of working on something, I think we can all agree on that. It's super helpful to have some help along that journey. And to me, I think to oversimplify it, there's two modalities to help. It's, I need help right now. Where can I get it? So that's more of a passive resource waiting for me as the learner to go get some help. But there's also a huge function of an active learner, an active participant who's holding me accountable, maybe checking in on me when it's inconvenient. But that's a really important part of real effective learning. And I think a chatbot can be effective in both modalities, being there. Like if for some reason I'm stuck on something at 3 a.m., I'm not going to call someone at 3 a.m., but if there's a chatbot there available to answer my question, a chat GPT type technology, that's great. And if I had someone that I trusted to hold me accountable, be checking in on me from time to time, I think that combination is really important if we're really committed to helping people learn.
So take me through the process of, moving this from what you and I like. I think a lot of people have been to, maybe a software as a service, some site that's providing a service where the bot comes up and is like, hey, how can I help you answer a question about the service or those kinds of things, to, is a chatbot something that is going to live in some kind of learning management system? Or, I've already signed up for a course, or I'm a student. Like, where does it live in that ecosystem? And then, what's the complexity difference between something that's kind of just customer service for thinking as opposed to helping me along my learning journey?
Yeah. One of the benefits of a chatbot, it's supposed to be frictionless, both from a usability perspective, like I'm not having to wade through tons of menus, I can just chat. Also from an accessibility perspective. And so a lot of us have experience with chatbots on a website. And that's kind of what you're describing. I go to a website, customer service chatbot pops open. But what happens when I close the tab and leave my computer? There's no way for that chatbot to interact with me. And so part of our definition of a chatbot, again, a computer simulated conversation, is that a chatbot should be able to extend beyond a website. So you can have a chatbot on WhatsApp or SMS or Microsoft Teams or Slack or WebEx or Zoom or Telegram. There's all these, WeChat. There's so many messaging apps that are used around the world. And the way that's helpful for me to think about it is wherever people I know are messaging me, that could be Facebook, it could be TikTok, it could be Teams again. If there's a chatbot on that channel, I call it a channel, that chatbot could have some usefulness for me. And so the answer isn't simply, just create a chatbot for this learner on your LMS. It should be, where are my learners? Where are they messaging people? And can I have a chatbot on that channel?
Mm.
And the answer is typically yes, you can. And then the second part of your question, how difficult it is, well, that depends on a customer service chatbot. Typically is pretty simple, because if you remember as a consumer, when chatbots first started emerging almost 10 years ago, people tried to make them smarter than they really were, and they were quite frustrating, because you'd ask it a question and a lot of times it couldn't answer, and then you'd be stuck and like, just please get me to a human being.
Yes, 1,000,000%. That's yeah.
And that's still true largely today. And so a lot of chatbots on customer service with a customer service function have a big button that says live agent, so you can actually circumvent the automation and get to a live agent. So that's actually pretty simple. Creating a chatbot, let's say on SMS, that's going to check in on me as a learner over 6 months as I'm trying to master, an algorithm or learning how to do whatever, X, Y, or Z. That's going to be a little bit more involved, but not as difficult as people might think. Because first of all, you don't want a chatbot to overwhelm people. If I'm getting a message from a chatbot via SMS multiple times a day, I'm going to opt out pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the design sensibility limits the complexity of chatbots like that.
Again, circling back to kind of the beginning of our conversation around ChatGPT, but also, what you kind of, I don't want to say you stole my thunder there, but like, are we just becoming more comfortable interacting with chatbots, or do we, how long, what am I trying to ask? I'm trying to ask is, what are the ways that I could implement a chatbot that assuage those frustrations, right? That take that, especially if we're going to keep it in a learning context, so that a learner feels like this is useful and valuable rather than frustrating. Like, what are some of the things that maybe best practices that you've seen around that?
Yeah. I think, we joked about the Matrix, and I think Hollywood has done both a service in capturing our imagination of what technology can do, and it's also done us a disservice by setting the wrong expectations. And so,
Sure.
like I also think of, Iron Man and Jarvis.
Oh my Lord, yes, absolutely, yeah, sure.
And even today, most people have a Google Home Assistant or an Alexa sitting at home, and they have trained us to know how limited they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they've trained us through being wrong, and I think that's required patience as consumers to be frustrated at an Alexa. But over time, we just learn. We either decide to turn it off entirely, or we decide, well, I guess asking it what the weather's like today, or asking it to play a song, that's useful enough for me, even though it might not be able to tell me the purpose of life in a meaningful way.
And I've found it. Sorry to interrupt, but I found it fascinating as I've moved between friends' houses, in different parts of the world, frankly, because I'm lucky enough to have had that life. But it's really interesting to see who's taken the time to interact with those and sort of say, hey, look, here's the 10 functions that I always use, and they really know how to get it to work. Whereas other people like myself, if it doesn't work the first time, I'm like, I can't be bothered. Like, I'm just too busy to train this thing. It's really it's really interesting. Do you think, within that question, do you think that those personalities still exist, or are we just more and more becoming like, hey, I'm going to have to learn to live with this thing?
Well, I think in the function of learning, we have the advantage of a easily understandable context. So what you shouldn't do with a chatbot is tell people, hey, I'm Jarvis, I'm going to help you master this or X, Y, Z, or I'm going to fire off your iron suit, whenever you want it. So people get that. So especially in corporate learning. So if you define the narrow scope of what the chatbot's going to do, like, hey, Laddick, you just finished this, high performance, high potential leadership course, good for you. We went over a lot of content over the last 3 days in this workshop. And my job as the chatbot over the next few months is just to remind you of the things that we learned.
Sure. The principles or the key learnings or.
Yeah. If I'm ever annoying, just turn me off.
And
I think within a narrow context like that, people are more than happy to interact with a chatbot. And then it becomes the function of how good the design is. Does it, when I receive that interruption, when that chatbot's interrupting me with a message, just like, when my kids or friends interrupt me, I'm not expecting a message and they text me. When I look at it, by them being virtue of close friends or family of mine, that's all the context I need.
Mm-hmm.
With a chatbot, it's the message.
Mm-hmm.
So if the message says, oh, that's really valuable, then people, we have found, are more than happy to interact with the chatbot. If the chatbot's off or for some reason feels like, oh, I don't really need this, then they'll either tune it out or they'll opt out.
I love the example that you just gave there, because I think myself for sure, and many people who are going to listen to this or are listening to this, I think I came into this conversation thinking about how do I create a structure, like a tree within a learning system, where I'm starting at, hey, here's the introduction to, knitting 101, and and then it's going to take me through a branched kind of tree according to how well I interact with it. I think that's still a legitimate use, but is that sort of 2020 version, and we should really need to rethink how we're using these, or is that not what you recommend to your clients?
I think both are great. I think having a decision tree is a great best practice for a passive chatbot experience, where the chatbot's waiting there for a learner to engage with it. And so, like, I don't know if you've ever tried like a conversation simulator. That's very similar, where, hey, I want to practice how to have a difficult conversation, and this chatbot's loaded with like 100 examples. I'm just going to go through a decision tree and practice. And that's a perfectly great use case for a chatbot. It depends what you're trying to accomplish. So I do think that it's useful to step back and say, what passive elements do I want for this chatbot? And if there are elements, then having a decision tree is a really easy user experience. And then what active elements do I want for this chatbot, if any? Do I want the chatbot to proactively ping people? And if so, what are those triggers? And by the way, could I have my chatbot smart and connected to my LMS so that the LMS can actually do a trigger? Like, hey, Vince, you just finished the Knitting 101 e-learning course. Would you like some help for me to help as you practice your knitting skills? That, I think there's some really interesting instructional design choices when you think about both active and passive. And it totally depends on who your audience is and what your learning initiative is.
How close can we get to, because now I'm evolving in this conversation how I think about what a chatbot is, because now I'm thinking of it like, hey, there's this kind of digital person, right? Like there is a personality there that you obviously were performing. So how close could this get to be a coach, a mentor? If I'm thinking of career path, and you're saying prompting along the way, maybe the right question is, what are the limitations? Where would you, if a client were coming to you and say, yeah, that's not a great use for a chatbot, you really need a human to do that. What have you bounced against that wall yet?
Yeah, well, lots of people would love a chatbot to have some emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is expensive.
Oh man, you just stumbled into that. There was a phrase that a friend of mine said the other day, and I told him I'm going to trademark this. I'm taking it from you, because it was like something. Oh boy, now I'm dying with it. But it's literally that. It's like it's the emotional investment or something like that. Yeah. I lost it. But yes, so emotional intelligence. Go there.
Yeah, it's expensive, and so people would like that. But today, chatbots don't have emotional intelligence, and when they try, they're often wrong. And when they are wrong, it's a big turnoff. We've all probably experienced that. Now, I will say ChatGPT gives us a glimmer of hope of what it could be, because I think even though ChatGPT doesn't have true emotional intelligence, it gives more substance, where you can tell there's a little bit of personality in ChatGPT actually, which I think is really interesting. But going back to your question, I think that's a firm line where people can say, well, we don't want a chatbot to cross there. But up to that line, a chatbot can be a coach in terms of following up with people, holding them accountable to their deliverables, keeping people on schedule, reminding them what their goals are. And it can also be very smart, like sending me, it can put stuff on my calendar for me. It can be like a virtual assistant in many ways. So I think we have seen clients who pull that off really nicely, where there's a blend of automation. Another way to think of it is, if you think about like a human coach, a very skilled human coach, what are some things that human coach is doing 95% of the time that are very repetitive and that can be automated? And if you automate those things and let that human coach excel with the 5 or 10% of things that where they're really in their sweet spot and they're really paying their bills because that's where they're needed, that helps an organization really not only save money, which the CFO is trying to do, but also really take full advantage of that skill set that really isn't very scalable.
I love that. And now, you've now teased us on, everything from a really structured sort of, decision tree kind of A to Z thing to, essentially a personal assistant that, you could, pick up your phone and say, hey, schedule this for my, schedule a meeting for me at 10 a.m., blah, blah, blah next week. If I'm sitting in university X or, mid-sized company Y right now, what's my investment on this in order to, get something up and running, that's going to be that I'm going to see value out of kind of tomorrow and feel like, wow, okay, this is, I want to keep going on this.
Yeah. So I've been working on helping people with chatbots for 9.5 years. We started in 2013. I've been through thousands of chatbot projects, not only on the mobile coach platform, which is the platform we've built, but just helping because I'm just an advocate and an evangelist for chatbots in general. Mm-hmm. My honest answer to your question, it's time and attention, and that's expensive for people.
Sure. I mean, times are most. I mean, that's the most valuable thing. That's what everybody judges their worth off. That's that, right?
Yeah, it's actually very ironic for people because they're looking to chatbots for scalability and to save cost. It's automation. That's what we want to do. But the common factor when I've seen chatbots fail, fall flat, or and perhaps even most importantly, fail to accomplish the business goal that the chatbot build is trying to create is the lack of attention to the detail. There's a lot of details that you have to wade through for the first 6 months, 12 months of a project to really have it deliver.
Give me a specific example. Like, you don't have to name names of clients or anything, but like, what are some of those missed details that you've seen in the past around setting something like this up?
Yeah. So I'll just give you a very common scenario. So a company has a learning initiative. They want a chatbot to follow up with every participant for, let's say, 3 to 6 months. And they're very confident, and rightly so, they're confident. And we know our people. Mm-hmm. We know the content. And so we don't want to overwhelm these people. So we're going to write 2 prompts a week over 6 months to send these people. And then we're going to configure that. We're going to make it live. We're going to put it on Microsoft Teams because that's where we're on. And we're just going to, see how it works. And so that's a very common scenario. What happens sometimes it's great, but a lot of times people will get the message and be like, meh.
And I love that. There's nothing like deliver. You spend all this time you deliver, and people are like, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. And so then they say, oh, chatbots don't work. Mm-hmm. And what they should do is, because there's a learning curve, and sometimes the difference between meh and wow, that was really helpful is very subtle. Mm-hmm. And so, it's the length of the message, it's sort of the tone of the message, it's the time of day, it's doing. And if I've been in software my whole career, and so many people in software say, I wish we could A/B test, but it's really expensive to A/B test. Like, wouldn't it be great to create an app on a smartphone and have like 3 versions and see which one works the best? No one does it because it's way too expensive. But with a chatbot, easy to do. Mm-hmm, you can have half the people get a message at 2 p.m., half the people get a message at 10 a.m., and just compare the response. And so that's an example of, if you can commit to that level of detail and rigor, your chances of having that chatbot accomplish the business result that you want are exponential. And so going back to your question, how expensive it is, that's where the main expense is in my mind.
Okay.
But so the actual technology for chatbots really isn't that expensive.
Oh, okay. So then tease this out for me a little bit, because, and I'm probably leading the witness here. you've worked in tech, I've worked in tech, we're tech people, one of the classic things is that the tech people end up designing the thing that ultimately interacts with either clients or, and so how important, again, in your consultancy over the last 9.5 years is, do you say, look, it's great that we've got you three in the room, but we actually also probably need the 10 other people who interact with customers or with the team. Like, talk to me about that need for that mix and that sauce of different personalities and whatnot to iterate and develop something that's going to be not only acceptable, but people are like, wow, this is really great. We want more of this.
Yeah. As tech people, we can geek out over like all these API connections and triggers and rules. And look, this message appeared right when it was supposed to. That's awesome. But the reader doesn't care about all those connections. They're just going to instantly react. Humans are so good at reading messages super fast. And so they'll read it and they'll react. And so to me, in my experience, I would say the number one skill for a chatbot to be successful is writing. And so in that room, you need to have a great writer. So sometimes people in learning where we've been trained, and I'm not, this is a function of just reality, but a lot of times if I'm responsible for a learning program and the business says, okay, you can have my manager from the manager training, but you can only have him for 2 hours. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I'm going to write 15 hours of stuff and put it into 2 hours. Cause that's kind of life as built as someone that's designing training has been. And sometimes that seeps into chatbot design. And so you need a writer that can also be patient and can prioritize a relationship over the interaction. And what I mean by that is I would rather have the user not turn me off and say, okay, not opt out, but continue with the chatbot experience by me dripping, like really, embracing a micro-learning sensibility versus trying to overwhelm people and then turning them off. And so having a lot of patience and saying, I would rather have interactions last over months than a week, if that means I'm going to get that person's attention and have them opt into our relationship over that period of time.
How much of a sell do you need to make with the non-tech people? And I'm thinking mostly this, I'm going to say this probably happens at a university or the education sector, the sphere, right? But I could really see a professor or even, I guess, somebody who is responsible for all of the, the learning design for a company be like, hey, I'm not a tech person. I design learning. I design how people are, learning outcomes. It's too technical for me, this and that. Like, what kind of sell do you have to do to get them on board?
Yeah, it's work right now to sell them. It's still, I would say we're still in the really early stages of chatbot design. If I can use a baseball analogy, we're in the first inning.
Wow. The first inning. Wow. Okay.
Just in the first inning. Yeah. Because I think, the people building chatbots today tend to be more technical. And I think we'll get into later innings when that university professor is comfortable. It's just as a standard practice to say, yeah, we're going to have a chatbot help my students in our class. And the curriculum, because right now, that happens from time to time, there's some really neat chatbot experiments happening in a university setting, but it's taking a traditional university content structure and trying to retrofit a chatbot into it. And when we get into the later innings, what's going to happen is the chatbot will just be a natural part of the overall learning design. And I think we're a ways away from that right now.
I'm remiss because I feel like I want to have like a 6-hour conversation with you, as I do with so many of my guests, where it's just like I'm surprised you've redefined my thought around what a chatbot is, which is really fantastic. I'm glad that was the outcome for me. But my final question for you is, it's January 2023 as we're having this conversation. What do you see in the next, near future, 6-12 months, in terms of how things are changing? Is there anything that you're particularly excited about? Is there, either a shift in the technology or maybe a shift in society that you think is going to be really prescient for the chatbot universe?
It's a really exciting time to be part of chatbots, mainly because, when I first started, I had to explain what a chatbot was. There was a lot of evangelizing. today, most people have had experience with them and then don't argue with that they need to exist. But a lot of chatbot platforms, which are now sort of, even though the market's still very nascent and early, there's a lot of chatbot platforms that are quite mature in terms of they've been around for 5, 6, 7 years. And those platforms have been made with the idea that if someone wants a chatbot, they'll just want one chatbot. I want to build my own Alexa, or I want to build my own single chatbot. That's sort of been the pervasive sort of common idea or thought. Where the market's going to evolve pretty quickly is that organizations, universities, even people will say, I could see myself interacting with many chatbots. And that's going to really drive innovation, make the authoring and managing of chatbots easier. The last thing I'll say about it too is that we're in an increasingly regulated world, and we're seeing that tension in tech today with privacy and accessibility and this tension, and that's true with chatbots too. Like, am I going to tell a chatbot my deep, darkest secret? And if so, where's that data living? And so I think answering all those questions is going to drive some great innovation to help protect user privacy, as well as really improve accessibility and usability for users. So I think there's a lot of really cool things happening.
Super cool. Vince Han, you're the CEO of Mobile Coach. Is there any particular way that you like for people to reach out to you? Is it LinkedIn? Is there an email address? Like what's the best way for people to contact you to get started?
LinkedIn is the easiest. You can just find me at Vince Han, and I check all my messages, and I loved connecting with people there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Vince. I really appreciate your time today, and I wish you all the best.
Same. It was great. Thanks, Sladek.